So here we're going to jump into chapter number 5 as we talk about political parties. And so grab your notes and follow along. Make sure that you are getting your questions answered and come check out the book and anything else in class that you need to. Use this as a review tool or use this in case of days that you are absent. We're going to begin here looking at the crash course video on political parties. I'll include that in the Canvas page for you, so that way you can check out the same video that we're going to watch in class. But for this video, we'll skip over that and jump ahead into Roman number 1, the roles of political parties and how they operate. And so we're going to begin here with the characteristics of these parties and try to describe them a little bit. I think it's pretty obvious that in the United States, we generally consider the Democrat and Republican Party as the two main political parties, but beyond their names and maybe some politicians that we might be able to associate with those political parties, we don't know a whole lot about why those parties exist, how they came about, or what makes up those parties. And so to define it here, we would say that it's a group of people joined by common principles. And the party leaders may claim that they all have common beliefs. And many political party proponents would say that all those in the Democratic Party have similar beliefs. But there is a lot of diversity within all of the members there, whether it's a Democratic Party or Republican Party. And so each one of these parties are trying to look for government control. That is ultimately one of the things that they are trying to drive for. So while we like to think that political parties have an agenda that is driven by principle and that is going to help make the world a better place, ideally that's where they would go, but it's primarily control of the government. And so it's going to be election driven. So many of the decisions that you see them make are going to be based on whether or not it's going to allow them to set themselves up to be reelected. They do have a desire here to impact public policies and programs. So even though they're trying to control the government, they are trying here to establish public policies and programs based off of their own ideas or their own goals for their party. For some politicians, this is their only motivation, is seeking control and making change. And that can be a good thing, but that can also lead people down the wrong path. Now, as far as the functions of parties goes, there are some incidental functions that are not specifically written out anywhere, but we can observe and we can see that these things happen. The political parties are very essential to the government, even though the Constitution never talks about them. They're not found anywhere in those documents. We've talked about George Washington's opposition to political parties in the past, but nonetheless, they have arrived and they often link the people to the government, and they help to bring about communication between the people and the government. They also help to make compromise between competing interests in the government. If we have differences of opinion between the Democrats and Republicans, they are not going to get anywhere unless they are willing to make compromises. And so because of our two-party system, it does facilitate that compromise. So there are some specific functions that are outlined both in your book as well as the parties themselves would outline this as their major roles of what they're trying to accomplish. So first of all, their primary function is to nominate candidates, and so they're going to recruit and promote candidates to run for office on their behalf. The party members then are going to decide the party's choice of that candidate by using primary elections. Now, we need to understand the purpose of those primary elections, as we've talked about them previously, that the primary elections will determine who will be on the ballot for the general election. And so that general election is going to come up in November, so the primary is going to happen usually in the spring, and individuals will have an opportunity to choose who they will see on that ballot. So don't neglect your opportunity to choose in the spring who you will see on the ballot in the fall. It's also, they also have the function here of gaining and informing supporters. So the party is going to try to get people to help run their campaigns, to help build support for their candidates that they have chosen. They might train staff, raise money, research issues that they're going to do. They are also going to be an accountability agent for the fact that they're going to make sure that their opposition is running a clean campaign or running an honest campaign. They're putting people in those offices that will do a proper job. And so they're going to hold the opposing party accountable, and likewise the opposing party will hold them accountable. And so that's an important element to that. To some extent, the party holds their own people accountable. However, for the sake of politics, many times they are willing to sweep items under the rug and ignore them if it helps to promote their own agenda. In the process of governing, the political party will assist in helping the individual who gets elected to actually govern and coordinate the efforts of those office holders there. They will work to help the individual set up their office appointments. Sometimes they will reach out to the opposing party to fill those positions, but generally not. Most of the time when they have the opportunity to hire people in Washington or in their own state house offices, they're going to follow what is called partisanship. Now, it's important that you get a definition or get an idea of what this means, because partisanship means that you're going to be loyal to your own party and essentially ignore members from the opposing party. So it is, if you're a member of the Republican Party, you're going to hire people from the Republican Party to help support you and to help you achieve your goals. Parties also serve as a watchdog, as they are going to very actively and carefully watch the opponent as they are in power. So let's say that a Republican gets elected to office as the president. The party out of power, which would be the Democrats, are going to actively watch that Republican president and criticize and go after any of the things that he does that they might think are unconstitutional or that are a violation of his power. So they're going to keep his power in check simply by bringing it to the attention of the media and the general public. We have a term here called the loyal opposition, and unfortunately we don't see this as much today as what we once did. This would be something that our framers had originally designed, as they did allow for the parties to form, that when somebody rises to power, that the opponent, let's say in my previous example, the Democrats who lost the election, would remain loyal to the country, but still in opposition to what the individual is doing. So they would pledge their loyalty to the nation, to the office of the president, but they still may not endorse that president as their favorite person. And so this is what's called the loyal opposition there. And unfortunately, we don't see that quite as much anymore, but they would be more loyal to the interests of the nation than they would to the individual, and would be a little bit more friendly about it. Now, in the two-party system, which is what has been ingrained in the United States here, there are a number of things here that we need to look back historically to remind ourselves of how we came about to the two-party system. We go back to the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists and take a moment here to review back to the characteristics and qualities of what makes up a Federalist, what makes up an Anti-Federalist. Of course, George Washington would have been opposed to any sort of political party anyway. However, he did provide a pretty solid warning through one of his speeches in which he said, however, political parties may now and then answer popular ends. They are likely in the course of time and things to become potent engines by which cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men will be enabled to subvert the power of the people and to usurp for themselves the reins of government, destroying afterwards the very engines which have lifted them to unjust dominion. I think that would characterize some of the modern day politicians George Washington warned us about so many years ago. And yet here we are still seeing the results of that. So the two-party system is reinforced from our current electoral system. And the way that we set up our elections really promote a two-party system. So I don't see this going away anytime soon, and I don't really know how we would replace it, even if we did try to. The way that the elections favor a two-party system is due to the fact that we operate on something called a single-member district. So we only have one candidate who's elected to each office. It doesn't matter what percentage of the vote they get as long as they win that election. And so it's a winner-take-all type of thing. We don't share government seats between 2 or 3 top candidates. We choose one person. And because of that, we're going to have those 2 parties that are going to fight against one another in competition for that one seat. I think it's important that we define 2 terms here regarding elections, and that is plurality versus majority. So plurality means that you have the highest percentage among all candidates, whereas majority means that you have 50% plus 1 vote. So many people look at elections and use the term majority where it should actually be used plurality. If we have 2 candidates and only 2 candidates, and we have 100% of the vote to be gotten from those 2 candidates, then as soon as somebody hits 50% of the vote plus 1 vote, they automatically win. Not so easily said if we have 3 candidates, because now we have 100% of the vote that can be divided 3 ways, so we could have somebody with 35% of the vote, somebody else with 45% of the vote, and somebody else with 25% of the vote. Well, you don't have a majority because nobody reached that 50% mark. We could have a plurality. So that candidate with 45% of the vote would be your winning candidate in a plurality election. And we may just be splitting hairs here between definitions. However, in government, you do need to make sure that you understand the difference between the 2 of those and understand that there are some states in which you have to have a electoral majority, 50% plus 1 vote, in order to win that campaign. Major parties also can cooperate together to limit ballot access. So for those minor parties that might come in as a third party, sometimes the Democrat and Republican Party will work in tandem, will work together to keep that third party off the ballot. And there are all kinds of ways about doing this. Just absolutely destroying them in campaigns, either with bad publicity or by snuffing out whatever small publicity the third party would try to put in the newspapers or on TV, is a way to keep people from becoming informed of that third party. And so if they don't get enough support, they may not get on the ballot, or if they do get on the ballot, really don't stand a chance of winning. And so minor parties typically have to work much harder to qualify to get on the ballot. And most of those minor parties cannot get enough resources to overcome those hurdles. Oftentimes, we have bipartisan effort to limit that ballot access. And so in contrast to the term partisan earlier that said it was only loyalty to one party, bipartisan means that you and another party are going to work together in order to accomplish a common goal. And in this case, your goal is keeping that third party candidate off the ballot. And so the Democrats, Republicans might work together in a bipartisan fashion in order to make that happen. Over time, most Americans have shared a lot of the same basic beliefs about the way that our country should operate. Things like capitalism or representative democracy, we'd all agree on. We'd say, yes, we as Americans believe in this. That shapes who we are. However, we tend to disagree over specific issues. Things like slavery, in the course of our history, tended to be a divisive issue. Or things like abortion. Or maybe it would be the definition of marriage, whatever that issue may be. Those sharp disagreements can lead to political division. And other nations have struggled with some of those divisions becoming permanent. And the United States has, in many ways, been able to overcome those divisions, but a lot of that is due to the moderates on the political spectrum. And so we typically have people who are very solidly on the Republican side of things and people who are solidly on the Democratic side. Those are the moderates who they could be swayed one direction the candidates are telling them or what the candidates are promising to them. And so they are really the key to making the country re-establish themselves back together even over some of those controversial issues. Because the Democrats don't want to swing too far to the extreme because they'll lose out on those moderates. And the Republicans, likewise, don't want to go too far to the extreme. They're going to keep themselves more toward the middle. And because of that, we don't see America tear itself apart too frequently. Now, we can wait to see what happens in the near future. I think at this point it'd be important to note the differences between the Democratic and Republican platform. In class, we spent some time looking over that and breaking down what the Democrats are proposing and what the Republicans are proposing, and any similarities, differences, connections, and so that might be worthwhile to take your time to go ahead and do that. So let's say that we decided we were not going to have a two-party system. What are the alternatives? How could we change it? Or what does it look like? We could go to a multi-party system. And if we were to do that, a multi-party system would be very similar to what is common in Europe or other parliamentary systems. And in a multi-party system, you're going to have several major parties and minor parties who are going to compete for political party altogether, or political power altogether. So you put kind of everybody all into one jumbled group, and whoever seems to have the best candidate or the best ideas is going to emerge out of that. Each of these parties is usually organized by a special interest that the people and the candidate form around. You can see on the screen up there several political parties that are generally formed around special interests. You have the Green Party, the Marijuana Party, Libertarian Party, Independent Party, Socialist Party, and Communist Party, just to name a few of them. They are formed based on a special interest, and they are gathering voters that are in high agreement with their particular platform. Proponents of this method say, well, voters have a lot more choices this way. They can vote for a candidate who more clearly aligns with their beliefs. However, single parties rarely gain control. And if we're to look at the European model and see how this works, most of the time, compromises have to be made. That there is no one minor party that's able to emerge as strong enough to defeat all the other ones. And so what results then is the merger of 2 or 3 or 4 small parties into one and compromise on their ideals to where it may not look quite the same by the time it's all said and done. Now we could also go to a one-party system. A one-party system might be more appropriately called a no-party system because this is often common in dictatorships where political dissent is not allowed. It's suppressed. The government is in control of the political parties. And there are some regions in the United States in which people have argued that they're really a one-party system because they're so dominated by one party or another that they really don't have an opportunity to get elected if they're of the other party. Now, it's really not true, but it may feel that way. So for political party membership, it is completely voluntary in the United States. You do not have to register as a member of a particular party in order to vote. However, some state voting laws do require that you register as a Democrat or Republican in order to vote in the primary election, but you are free to switch that party alliance at any point, and you do not have to vote that way in the general election. You can vote any way that you want to, but your membership is always voluntary. While there is no one demographic that fits with the Democrat or Republican Party in the United States, there are a few demographics that tend to be included or people tend to gravitate toward in the Democratic Party. And so there are a few of these that I would say are trends, but not absolutes. And so I would jot these down. In the Democratic Party, it tends to include Jews, African Americans, women, and union members. Now again, that's not always the true way that it goes, but if we were to look at the general trend, those would be included. On the Republican side, it would tend to include whites, males, and businessmen. Again, it does not mean that that is the only group that's there, but those are the trends, and so when they're selecting their platform, they know that this is the way it's always been, so they need to decide, are they going to continue with the status quo, or are they going to try to reach out to some of those other groups that are not currently part of their organization. However, if we look at those who are voting and voting for the first time or choosing which party they're going to jump into, family is usually the strongest predictor. If you look at what your parents are or how your parents have voted, it is generally true that you're going to fall in line with the way that they have voted or the party that they have most closely associated. We can also look back at the Civil War and Great Depression, as well as many other historical events, to pinpoint specific trends in party membership. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we go to the historical look at the two-party system and examine the timeline of political parties and how those have changed over time and how presidents have been elected based off of major events in our country. And so historical events are a major factor in party membership and who is involved in each one of those.